Welcome to this presentation on Suzanne Duquet. I want to briefly thank our panel chair, Aaron Silver, and the conference organizers for this fantastic event. And I'm just going to jump right into my presentation because I know time is tight. The career of Suzanne Duquet challenges periodizing conventions and traditional definitions of modernism in particular. An elusive figure in her heyday, Duquet has now unfortunately fallen into almost total obscurity, particularly outside of Quebec. This despite her stunning and innovative output of computer paintings, vibrant reinterpretations of computer graphics generated by algorithms that she programmed herself at the University of Western Ontario during a series of residencies in the early to mid-1970s. In this paper, I will consider Duquet's early School of Paris inflected corpus in tandem with the computer paintings to explore how the very belatedness of her reception situated her modernist practice at the vanguard of intermedial experiments in art and technology, straddling the modern-postmodern divide. When Duquet first exhibited examples of these stunning oils on paper at Galerie Saint-Denis in 1977, she was both an established and respected figure in the Montreal art world and yet, astonishingly, still something of an unknown quantity. Duquet's inaugural exhibition of abstractions paralleled a retrospective of her earlier figurative production from 1939 to 1954 at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. Despite having taught at the École des Beaux-Arts and following its 1969 amalgamation at FUQAM for a combined total of more than 34 years, Duquet was hailed by the press as a newcomer. In a combined review for the two shows, symptomatically titled The Duquet Debut, Montreal Star critic Georges Bogardy wrote that, "Till now, Suzanne Duquet the painter has been all but unknown." Bogardy went on to praise, quote, "the sense of privacy that surrounds the two exhibitions," end quote, a demure aura that he attributed to the artist's, quote, "reticence." Such reviews reflect the pervasive sexism of their time. There is certainly nothing reticent about the muscular dynamism of Duquet's computer paintings, whose exuberant vectors recall the athletic choreographies of futurist canvases from the early 20th century. Like those earlier painters, Duquet's computer paintings materialize her ambition to transform motion into dynamic stasis. The contents of Duquet's MMFA retrospective attest to the longevity of the School of Paris as the leading model for Montreal modernists of her generation. Consisting mainly of portraits as well as nudes, the 15 years production that it assembled threw a spotlight on the human figure as, quote, "the central element in Duquet's practice," attributing this preference to a chronic lack of funds, which necessitated that the artist employ friends as sitters in lieu of professional models. It is, quote, "the female figure," noted a Vie des Arts reporter, "that absolutely carries Duquet's early output." Beginning in 1964, the artist charted a bold new course in abstraction with her cryptograms. A residual figuration is nonetheless legible in the sinuous lines that dominate these assured calligraphic abstractions, which recall the contours of the artist's earlier nudes. At the same time, the series title points to a nascent preoccupation with coding and encryption that anticipates her subsequent engagement with computers. Oscillating between distinct visual registers, being legible as both abstracted figures and decorative script, the ambivalent phenomenology of Duquet's cryptograms parallels that unfolded by the iconic Studies in Perception 1, or Nude, from 1966, a computer-generated print by Bell Telephone Laboratories engineers Leon Harmon and Kenneth Knowlton, which we see here at right. Depending on spectators' viewing distance, Nude is readable as either a random array of alphanumeric characters or as the titular female nude. Duquet's cryptograms are, to quote Zabet Patterson, writing on Nude, simultaneously experiments in pattern recognition and works about information encoding, in which computation is inscribed directly on the body. A chance meeting with John Hart, the chair of the computer science department at the University of Western Ontario, At a conference on telecommunications and the arts hosted by York University in the spring of 1970 coincided with a radical change of direction for Duquet. Hart invited Duquet to visit Western's computer science department to experiment with the graphic possibilities of computation. Over the course of 2 summer residencies between 1970 and 71, Duquet worked with Western programmer Michael Doughty to refine a simplified graphics programming language intended for use by artists, such as herself, with no prior technical training. Initially working with a light pen to execute drawings directly onto the screen of a cathode ray display tube, Duquet quickly mastered Doughty's programming language, which enabled her to compose her own animations. Slide documentation of the resulting animations, photographed in 35mm film directly from a cathode ray tube, evidently formed the basis for Duquet's oil-on-paper paintings, an example of which we see here. The increasing complexity and scale of these works culminated in parallel series of large format paintings produced in 1976-77, including PARR, and these bear whimsical titles as well, such as Flaw. These works on paper are, in fact, I would argue, belated interpretations of computer animations that were coded in 1971-72. Duquet's archive, which is housed by FUQAM, meticulously documents every stage in the artist's multimodal process, from the computer programs that she scripted for each series using Doughty's graphics language, to 35mm slides and enlarged duplicate negatives documenting the resulting animations. Printouts of Duquet's programs are accompanied by hand-drawn diagrams plotting the initial positions of the geometric elements manipulated in each series. An annotated diagram sketched by Duquet in 1975, which we see in this slide, visualizes the hybrid media ecology navigated by this, by today's standards, convoluted computational process, from ideation to coding, machine processing, and ultimately output as either cathode ray animation or static plotter drawing. Duquet's switching between multiple analog and digital platforms to produce her computationally generated paintings matches Zabet Patterson's description of the, quote, complicated and non-intuitive transitions between analog and digital and between highly specialized machines, end quote, required to produce Harman and Knowlton's nude. In addition to introducing evidence of the artist's hand, Duquet's paintings augment the black and white computer animations upon which they were based through their seductive palette of fleshy magentas. Her paintings thereby answer her own earlier lament in a 1971 article published by Vie des Arts that, quote, with the computer, color is practically non-existent, end quote. Insinuating the affective language of hand-mixed color into the rational vectors traced by Doughty's machine-readable code was part of Duquet's creative imperative to, quote, make machines crazy, end quote. In this respect, Duquet's computer paintings parallel the strategy of institutional infiltration pursued by Greg Kernow through his computer journals, which were likewise produced with Doughty's assistance at Western's Department of Computer Science. In Duquet's case, the artist mobilizes color to infect computation's aura of scientific objectivity with an affective surplus. Duquet's chromatic intervention is illuminated by Victoria Salinger's feminist gloss on the contemporaneous calculations performed by the German conceptual artist Hanna Darboven, whose critics dismissed her computational art as, quote, decorative pattern making, thereby implicitly associating it with a historically denigrated mode of feminized craft. The stigma against mindless or meaningless repetition, writes Salinger, is one Darboven shared with decorative arts, end quote. Like Darboven's handwritten calculations, the sums of figures representing calendar dates, Duquet's hand-painted computer images deliberately corrupt the rationalist and masculinist values frequently attributed to computers with ornamental embellishments or traces of embodiment. Departing from Harman and Knowlton's spectacularized presentation of the female nude, however, the virtual choreographies traced by Duquet's abstracted figures evade the objectifying gaze of scientific registration and male desire. In all its varied avatars, Suzanne Duquet's art hovers between the modern and the postmodern, in some sense belonging to both designations and simultaneously neither. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take questions at the appropriate time in this panel.